The animals on the tables outside, the elephants are for sale. I'm not sure who's selling them, and there's books for sale, so I'm doing my duty by reminding you of that. I want to introduce you now to the next panel. On screen is Dr. Marion Garai. Her area of specialization and expertise are on the social behavior of elephants in captivity, particularly in zoos, and social stress-related behaviors of translocated juvenile elephants, which is appropriate because this panel is capture conditions and destinations. She's a long-standing member of the African Elephant Specialist Group, and she was the founder and chair of the Elephant Management and Owners Association. She's also a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of the European Elephant Group in Germany, trustee of Elephant Reintegration Trust, and what Marion's going to be looking at today is sharing the latest data on elephants in zoos worldwide, including numbers, births, deaths, and accidents. Lynn James, second from me, is the chair of the Mutare SPCA in Zimbabwe. She's been a volunteer there for the past 8 years. And since 2015, she's been actively involved in trying to stop the live capture of Zimbabwe elephants into captivity. Now her job is to figure out what to do with 30 elephants in captivity, but she'll be discussing her experiences with live elephant capture. Lennon Chizaria, he's also from Zimbabwe. He's an environmental lawyer and researcher in Harare, where he's the director of People and Earth Solidarity Law Network. At the moment, he's involved in a court action on access to information on animal capture and wildlife trade transparency in Zimbabwe. He's a very brave man. His topic is the capture and sale of elephants, young elephants in Zimbabwe. He's just been to COP18, so he'll bring some of that in. Brett Mitchell, second from the end, he's the chairperson of the Elephant Reintegration Trust. Since 2016, he's been working and handling and training elephants for the past 20 years, managing and operating businesses in the safari industry, specifically elephant-back safaris. He ran Pilanesberg elephant-back safaris for 12 years. He specializes in handling and training captive elephants and their reintegration in the wild. And what he'll be talking to us today is about the current status of captive elephants and the captive elephant industry in South Africa. We're going to start with Marion.
Hi, everybody. Can I start?
Yes. Sure, Marion, go for it.
Okay, all right. Okay. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm excited that there's such a group of people that are thinking the same, and I think it's very encouraging. As Joyce said earlier on, sometimes one really gets up in the morning and wonders, what the hell does one do? Is it worth it? But having a panel like this and people like this fighting with together along side by side, I think, yes, it's definitely worth it. Okay, I'm going to give you a presentation today, and you'll just have to bear with me because it's numbers, numbers, numbers. And I must say I'm very, very grateful to the European Elephant Group, who've got the most fantastic database, and they have been providing me with the absolute latest information. Even still last night, I was getting data from China. So it's really, really up to date what I'm going to present now. I won't be able to go through everything, time restriction, but I think it'll just give you an idea of how many elephants are actually out there in zoos and safari parks. And this does not include any camps or riding elephants or privately owned elephants or the many, many temple elephants in Asia. This is just the registered zoos and safari parks. We've got a total of 498 facilities, with a total of 605 African elephants, and our total elephants are 1,770. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the zoo lingo, it's what is in brackets is the first figure gives you the males, and to the right of the comma gives you the females, and if there's a third figure, those are the unknowns. It's been divided into the European Endangered Species Program, which is essentially Europe and Israel. The SSP is America and Canada. Then there's the Australian Species Management Plan, and further down Asia, Japan, and Africa. Right. Wild-born of all these zoo elephants, I'm now talking about these 1,770 zoo elephants, there's most of them are wild-born. There's only 542 which are captive-born. And if you look to the right, you will see how many zoos there are, how many safari parks, and only 22 sanctuaries. Most of these elephants are either African or Asian, but some of them in the European region, in the SSP region, keep both species. As you can see, 7 zoos have both species either together in the same facility or in different facilities. Oops, sorry. This is countries with zoo elephants in the order of elephant numbers. So the most are in the United States, followed by China, Germany, Japan, etc., etc., etc. On the bottom graph are the zoos, the countries that keep less than 6 elephants down to 1 elephant. There's quite a lot of countries with 1 elephant. And this is just to give you a breakdown of the countries that keep 1 elephant per zoo. There might be 2 or 3 or 4 zoos in a country, but they each only keep 1 elephant. Most of them are wild-born. These are all the countries. And the next one, and there are 96 facilities holding a single elephant. 82 of them are wild-born and 14 are captive-born. If we look at the total births in zoos, I think I forgot to mention this data is from dates from the year 2000 to today. So nothing before 2000. Obviously most the African elephants in the EEP region, that's in Europe, they have the most births, 143 births, with 388 Asian elephants, and less in the Americas, and going right down very, very little in Africa or in Asia of the African elephant. If you look at the total, they have been 268 elephants born since the year 2000. A total of 995 elephants have been born in zoos. And just to include the circuses at the bottom, you've got 101 births in circuses. We picked out a couple of countries which have very, very little births. These are mainly the countries that will be interested in getting wild elephants, such as China. They only have had 3 births since the year 2000. One of them was a stillbirth. Deaths, if we look at the deaths in the EEP region, in the last 19 years, 147 versus America, 118. But if we compare births versus deaths, there's slightly more deaths in the EEP region. There's substantially more deaths in the SSP region, the Americas, which is why they're interested in getting elephants. And we also did a graph to show the development of the stock since the year 2000. At the top, the blue, you've got the total. So in the EEP region, there's a slightly less elephants. And in the SSP region, there's even a slight increase. But as we saw earlier on, they had more deaths. So this is due to imports, that they now have slightly more elephants. Age distribution is quite interesting. In the European region, the average age is 24.8. As you can see, with most of the cows around between 20 and 40. In the Americas, most of the cows are between 30 and 50. So very little in the actually breeding age. An average age in the Americas is 30.5 years old. different types of management, free contact versus no contact or protected contact. I'm just going to highlight a few points. In the EEP region, you've got nearly 63% that are in protected contact. In the Americas, you've got 73% that are in protected contact, managed by stud book or not managed at all. Then further down, the breeder. I think this is an interesting one. In the entire European elephant population of Loxodonta, you've got 56 individuals which are actually breeders. 14 males, 42 females. And in the Americas, 41. The origin, further down, captive versus wild born. In the European region, 9% are wild born. In the Americas, 75.8% are wild born. And interestingly, the reproduction in Europe, it's slightly more natural. 94% is natural births. And in the SSP region, they've got about a quarter of them, 25% through AI, that's artificial insemination. But if we look at the artificial insemination, out of the 56 births in the USA, there's 44% is artificial insemination. I'm just going to scan through this quickly because I see time's flying. Interestingly, in the Americas, if you look at the artificial insemination versus the natural reproduction, you've got live births versus stillbirths. You've got more out of 16 live births and 7 stillbirths resulting from artificial insemination, whereas naturally conceived elephants, you've got 93% of actually survival. Right, group sizes, elephants, these are facilities keeping 1 elephant, 2 elephant, 3 elephant, 4 elephant, etc., etc. In the European region, most of them are here around the 2 to 4 elephants. In the Americas, also around the sort of 2 to 5 elephants. Then calf survival, as we did the study, and this was of the breeding elephants in the European zoos. The age of the mother, if she was under 10-year-old, the survival chances were 33% of her calf. If the mother was 10 to 15 years old, there was a much higher survival chance of 88. And the highest was if she was between 50 and 20 years old. Then the imports, and I think this is now the interesting part for us. How many elephants have been imported, African elephants, this is only African elephants, since 2000? In the European region, 12, Americas 31, Middle Americas 14, and right down to China with 110 imported elephants, bringing the total to 177 imported elephants. There have been occasionally also transfers or additions coming from circuses, but most of them are originating from Africa. The origin of the wild boar, if we now look at the European region on the left-hand side, most of them come from Zimbabwe and South Africa, highlighted in yellow. On the right-hand side, you've got the Americas. Most of them come from Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Eswatini. Then, this is fixing onto China. What do we know about the 110 imports of African elephants since the year 2000? And this was up to 2 days ago. We were still trying to get information. And this is really, really up to date, what we have here. Imports, the destination to which zoos, how many have died, how many are still alive, and the origins. And all of them come from Zimbabwe, excepting the 2008 import, which is uncertain. But it could be South Africa, it could be Zimbabwe. So it's quite interesting that out of those 110, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, 99 are still alive. We know that it's 13 bulls, 20 females, and 66 of unknown sex. And then the destination, you've got all the zoos where the elephants were transported to. These are the baby elephants from Zimbabwe. We all know those pictures. And sometimes they went to a zoo, which was possibly accredited by CITES, but from then they get moved. If you look, for example, at the Wild Animal Park in Shanghai, imported 17 elephants, but from then they went to Leheledu, to Harbin, etc., etc., some of them even to Inner Mongolia. Right. I'm nearing the end. Just to give you an idea, these are some of the pictures from these zoos in China. At the bottom left, Kuwait Zoo. Otherwise, you've got the Mongolia Zoo and the Chinese zoos. This is how the elephants are kept in Mongolia. If you look at the play area at the bottom, huge play area. Some further Chinese zoos, a lot of them are trained, as you can see on the bottom picture. They have to perform, so they get something. There's more pictures I have of them performing. What is quite interesting, a lot of zoos have closed down. In total, 189 zoos have closed down the elephant facility. However, sadly, between 119 to 162 have opened up a new facility. So the difference is only between 27 to 70 maximum less facilities that now hold elephants. Injuries, we've got 66 in the EEP region, 38 in the SSP region. These are known injuries. And just my very last slide is to give you an idea of the Bristol report, which was done in 2008, of the elephants, how many of them have foot problem in zoos, limping, lame, major foot problems, sores, etc., etc. I think my time is up if I understood that bell correctly, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Marion. Now, next up, Lynn James.
Thank you. There are several wonderful and renowned elephant experts in Zimbabwe, and I'm not one of them. I'm an animal welfare volunteer, perhaps like some of you here today. There are many better folk that should be speaking to you, but somehow it's me who's here, and I apologize for that at the outset. There cannot be many people who've witnessed live elephant captures, and again, thankfully, I'm not one of them. In Zimbabwe, it's a highly select group of people who witness these captures, and they're done in a highly clandestine manner. You may have watched some of the footage of these brutally cruel events. Zimbabwe government started live captures for sales to zoos in 2012, and this year we have about 36 young elephants in the Mchibi Bomas at Hwange National Park. I say about because we don't have access, and the people who do have access don't part with that information easily. So, having not watched a capture, I have seen some of the footage, as I'm sure some of you have, and it's unbelievably brutal. So basically, the helicopter goes up, it finds a herd, it drives the herd until some of the youngsters in that herd can't keep up anymore. They're then darted, at which point, of course, the mothers will return, and some of the herd will return sometimes, and they will do their best to get the darted elephant up and to try and keep it safe. Of course, at this point, the chopper's already there, it's on them, the mothers are driven off, and in move the trucks. Sorry, let me move that forward. Aha. I'm also technologically challenged.
The other side.
The other way. Those are just some Zimbabwe elephants doing what they do quietly. This is some capture footage. So this is, if we could play it. There is a soundtrack, you would hear the chopper. At some point it says that these are legal captures within Zimbabwe. Lennon sitting next to me will dispute that, I'm sure, and that's part of our argument. There's obviously... Is that me?
We'll just keep it muted.
Okay, there you go. I'll just talk over it. So obviously that little guy has just been captured, and you can see how he's treated. That you didn't get the sound effects there, but there's obviously a lot of shouting, he's wild. I mean, that's him just shoved in the crate. Thanks to The Guardian, they said we could share, and I am. So, moving on. Oh no, we don't want to see it again. There you go, they're the little guys in captivity. So our involvement in the elephant capture started in 2015 with a friend called Jane High when we realized what was actually happening. So we decided to try and raise awareness. We tried to attend a demonstration in Harare. We traveled 3 hours to do that. We had our placards and our banners and everything, and on the morning of the demonstration, permission was denied. We actually thought we were going to attend a well-organized event and we would be on the coattails of that event, and that isn't what happened. We were the event. There were 4 of us, and we met up with a few more people in Harare. It made a total of about 10. What was absolutely staggering was that, and a major eye-opener, was Zimbabweans as a whole had no idea that their government was exporting their wildlife heritage to China. The lack of knowledge was hugely concerning. Not only that, the people that did know, the people who cared, those in the wildlife arena, be it tourism, conservation, the NGOs, the wildlife vets, those who you'd expect to be jumping up and down and raising awareness, and alerting the world, on the whole were not. This too was of grave concern. We swiftly discovered the reason why so few members of the general public weren't jumping up and down, and that's because of the clandestine manner in which these operations are carried out. You don't get access. The situation at the pens at Mshibi is described as a total lockdown. The footage that's come out of there is really through undercover agents, other animal welfare organizations who paid to get that footage, obviously from the people that are there at the pens at the time. I think since then, cell phones are probably banned at the pens. The reason that the wildlife fraternity are not at the forefront of this, as you'd expect, is their tenuous link with our national parks. Their reliance on parks for permits, for concessions, for access to parks, for conservation work. They're only too aware that if they put their heads above the parapet on this, they could and would most likely be shut down. Access denied, permits declined. That is how Zim operates. Everything is politically motivated. The power and control of our government cannot be overstated. We shoot unarmed civilians in the streets in Zimbabwe. And then there's what happens behind closed doors. The fear factor is real, ever present, and needs to be recognized. And maybe that's why I'm speaking to you today, and there should be better qualified people actually talking. So as a result, there's an oppressive blanket of silence. What must the world think when the people of the country committing these brutal captures and exporting young elephants to lives in hellholes in China and elsewhere are not actively raising the alarm? Surely this must be bewildering, incomprehensible, really. At this point, we started what we called Zim Ellies. We got as much information as we could. We're not tied to national parks, so we found information from any avenue that we could, and we started producing Zim Ellies bulletins to distribute the information. We learned that it wasn't only elephants that were being captured for export. In fact, at the time, lion and sable were in the holding pens, later hyena, baboons, crocodiles, the list goes on. But who holds that list? Who's keeping track? What casualties have there been? What are the costs to wildlife in this travesty? We learned that our corrupt government doesn't actually care about cruelty and our own national laws pertaining to it. They are money motivated. In 2012, the then Director General of Parks, Vitalis Chidenga, referred to these wildlife exports as a business arrangement. They also disregard information put forward by the very qualified people who are speaking here today. Everybody, as has already been said, have written that we have petitions from everybody. It doesn't seem to make a difference, not to our government. From an animal welfare perspective, it seemed inconceivable that the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority were not taken to court using our Prevention of Cruelty Act. We approached the Zimbabwe National SPCA, who were apparently the chosen body to fulfill the animal welfare role at the Mchibi holding pens in Hwange National Park. It must be noted here that both the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act and the Animal Welfare Inspectorate fall under the Ministry of Environment in Zimbabwe, as of course do our national parks. This means that any checks and balances all fall together, and it honestly smacks of guarding the hen run while the fox is in the coop. The Zim Wildlife does not fall under the Prevention of Animal Cruelty Act until they're in captivity, at which point there should be unrestricted and unhindered access by animal welfare. This access was not permitted initially, and finally only ZNSPCA, under the same ministry, were granted severely restricted access under immense pressure. The holding pens were in lockdown and the cloak of secrecy continued. The clandestine nature of these captures certainly begs the question, if this is all so above board, so legal, and so CITES compliant, why the intense secrecy? It just does not add up. The finding of ZN's inspections, however limited they were, should have been made public. It is the right of Zimbabweans to know that what was happening within their park was within the law and within our Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Fellow SPCAs should have been availed of these reports, but this did not happen. Despite our approaches and requests, these findings were not shared. No reports, documents, or photographs were ever seen by us, and no cooperation or collaboration were encouraged. Visits to the holding pens by ZNSPCA now appeared to be part of the clandestine events. And there was a genuine fear surrounding the whole process, just like the drug-dealing underworld. Any information that ISPCA received came through the network of underground agents, for want of a better word, and from fellow organizations, as I've already mentioned to you, also driven by the same mission of exposure. Our Prevention of Cruelty Act is a strong piece of legislation, and we believe that those with the mandate to act against cruelty must use it to best effect. We expected this to happen, and it did not. In my opinion, animal welfare failed in its mandate. Despite our government's extreme arrogance, they do try to avoid negative exposure and publicity around their endless corrupt dealings. If you decide to engage them on their level, you may believe that you are making headway. You may want to believe what they tell you. In 2012, the then DG, Director General of National Parks, declared that that shipment of elephants would be the last. By engaging and appeasing our government, it is akin to feeding a crocodile and hoping that it eats you last. Your turn will come. We have chosen the alternative route of trying to expose the government's capture activities, for better or for worse, at the same time as we fully acknowledge that there are wildlife NGOs who cannot risk the essential work that they do and their hard-won funding by openly fighting this cause. We believe that animal welfare organizations have an obligation to act. It is their mandate, and the public expect it. Worse still, the public assume it will happen. They think that if your name's associated with it, all is fine. I think they think if CITES is associated with it, all is fine. We all know that is not the case. We pursued our goals. We joined forces. We started working with Vets for Animal Welfare Zimbabwe. We approached Zim Parks. We tried to get access. We were declined. We tried to repeatedly meet Zim parks. Often we waited for hours and we were stood up. We issued a joint statement with Bulawayo, SPCA, and Vets for Animal Welfare, clearly stating our stand on the issue. We followed the CITES certificates trail to terrestrial safaris offices in Harare. That was Jane High who did that. That was an unpleasant experience. We realized that not only were our own national laws being broken, but those of CITES as well. It's been a great disappointment to watch CITES work. Their very own regulations include such terms as proof of non-detrimental findings. No national laws are to be broken in the process. Minimize cruel treatment. The CITES Scientific Authority, who should surely be an independent, truly scientific body, appears for all the world to be part of Zim parks. To hear the Secretary General of CITES say last week that they would investigate any query brought before the Secretariat if evidence was provided was a low blow. If they require a non-detrimental finding, then surely they should ensure it is indeed genuine. If CITES cannot even ensure that their own regulations are enforced, what use are they as a body to preserve our endangered species, and certainly in a lawless country like our own? Taking the legal route, I'll be quick. Taking the legal route is never an easy one. Certainly in a country like ours where there's selective use of the law, the outcome is never assured, no matter that the law is on your side, at least on paper. Finally, in February this year, Sharon Hall put us in touch with Pear's lawyers, and we met Lennon. They're a new non-profit legal organization, and I'm sure that Lennon will fill you in on exactly what they do, but we have been working together since. It is refreshing and somewhat reassuring to have such knowledge and energy behind us and behind our cause at last. Just quickly on our government's excuses for these captures, I will leave the fact that it's part of population control to the experts, and I think they've answered that already. However, I can speak to the claim that these sales fund conservation in our national parks. Not 1 cent of the fund from these sales, from the sale of these elephants and other wildlife, goes towards conservation of anything other than government officials and the politically elite. This is common knowledge. You only need to look at the state of conservation within national parks, bar one being Ghana Resort National Park, which is now a trust, Ghana Resort Conservation Trust, and they work together with the Frankfurt Zoological Society, and they are doing the most awesome work. For the rest of our parks, they are grossly overstaffed for what they actually achieve. Staff are not paid on time, neither are they properly capacitated to do their work. Tourism facilities are literally falling apart. Currently, it is NGO funding that does the work that our national parks should be doing. Yet despite this, our president is still able to stand up and say, in a nutshell, we look after it, and therefore we will do what we want with it. The look after it bit is far from accurate. We did meet with the current Director General of Parks earlier this year when we expressed our interest in the elephants held in the pens and the possibility of purchasing these elephants. Not that we had the funding, but we figured the world might help us. And we were told to compile our wish list. What exactly did we want, and what could we bring to the table for these elephants? And Parks would compile their wish list, which they did. Parks also mentioned that if we took the wish list away from the table and exposed it, that that would be the end of the discussion. But if we were really honest, there was never really any discussion. And the wish list went from basically a bootlace, I might be exaggerating that, but almost a bootlace, to helicopters and jets. So our parks are broke. While on the funding side, instead of spending millions buying our precious elephants, this money could be better spent on securing real partnerships with our national parks, like the Ghana Resort Conservation Trust, to secure their current ranges and work towards expanding these wherever possible. We have high-level signatures in all the right places for trans-frontier parks with our neighbors, but little commitment on the ground by some parties to get these up and running as functioning wilderness and wildlife safe havens. Okay, sorry, it's the last sentence, Don, sorry. In closing, I'd like to thank all those who were behind driving the vote at CITES last week that resulted in the ban. That's fantastic, thank you. We hugely appreciate it. I cannot close without thanking Network for Animals, who stepped up to the plate unbelievably to fund getting Pez lawyers where they ended up at CITES. Thank you to Vors for working with us, and to Don for the 30 captive elephants. Zim has the capacity. We have the capacity to look after those elephants. Hopefully they will stay on our soil and they'll be well managed there.
Thank you, Lynn. I hope your passage back into Zimbabwe will be trouble-free. Lennon, Caesarea, your time.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. First of all, I think I would like to thank EMS Foundation, Michelle, Stefani, and Tim for this first ever INDABA on elephants in captivity. My name is Lenin Chisaira. I'm an environmental lawyer, and I'm based in Zimbabwe. I work with the People and Earth Solidarity Law Network, or PS lawyers for short. What I can say is that Lynn has summed up very well the context in which we are discussing about elephants, the welfare of animals in Zimbabwe, as well as the wildlife trade transparency. The laws, there's generally secrecy, there's lack of access to information on wildlife trade in Zimbabwe. But the laws, fortunately, provide for a number of animal and environmental rights, and that's where we come in mostly as environmental lawyers and as activists. Technology. So generally, this is an outline of my presentation in the time that I'm given. I will give you an overview. I will talk a bit about African elephant politics. I also go briefly into the Zimbabwe's legal and police framework on wildlife trade and on animal welfare. And then I also sum up with some of the challenges and opportunities that is presented by the current laws and that is also presented by the current context. Then I will go on a way forward where I give a number of suggestions or a number of recommendations that I feel are critical in order for us to keep on preserving our wildlife. So in terms of the overview, I'm sure you can see a picture of Robert Mugabe there. And today is a day when, if we're talking about Zimbabwe, we also have to mention that a number of people are mourning, and some are neutral about this morning's passing on of Robert Mugabe. Why I mentioned Robert Mugabe here, it's not just that I'm giving an overview of Zimbabwe and he's the founding president, he's the founding leader. But in 1990, President Mugabe issued a decree for the protection of some elephants in Hwange National Park. These were known as the presidential elephants. Of course, since then, a lot has happened, and some have talked about those presidential elephants that some say they are diminishing. But at those moments in the early 90s, he was one of the African leaders who were concerned about the protection of Zimbabwe's elephants. Of course, as time went on, lots of things changed. So the other thing to note about Zimbabwe is that obviously it is a Southern African state and it has got an outspoken history of wildlife management. There are quite a number of stakeholders. I'm still giving the overview. There are also a number of stakeholders when we are talking about animal welfare or the trade in wild elephants in Zimbabwe. So I'll just give an overview of some of these key stakeholders. We have the ZIMPACS, which is the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority. That's like the main authority that is mandated with looking after Zimbabwe's wildlife. It's a product of the Parks and Wildlife Act, which is one of the critical legislations dealing with wildlife in Zimbabwe. It also houses the CITES management and scientific authorities in Zimbabwe. It falls under the Ministry of Environment, which is also the government department that is directly responsible for wildlife management. Then we also have what we call the Joint Operational Command, where we have ZIMPACs aligning with the security sectors, Zimbabwe Republic Police, the army, mostly on campaigns against poaching. Also have safari operators. We have a number of civil society organizations, SPCA, Veterans for Animal Welfare, ourselves, and other organizations that are also concerned with animal welfare. Then the rural communities, they also take center stage when we are discussing animal welfare in Zimbabwe, as well as international bodies, non-profit organizations, international NGOs. So that's the overview when we are talking about wildlife trade and transparency in Zimbabwe. So I will move on to the political aspects. Zimbabwe and other SADC countries were at CITESCOP recently, and indeed they lost a considerable battle, especially the positions that they were pushing for, one of which is for them to be allowed to trade in ivory stockpiles, as well as also to trade in live animals beyond their natural range. But they won the vote to keep the African elephant populations in Southern Africa, to keep them within Appendix 2, but obviously with certain conditions. So if we are to look at the political context within Southern Africa, you would appreciate that the fight for animal rights within Southern Africa is challenging. It is rocky, and at times it is even dangerous because of the interlinks with between the politics, the interests, and the sensitivities that are involved. So it is really brave that we have a number of people here around Southern Africa, in Zimbabwe and South Africa, and in all these countries, who are still fighting for animal rights, who are still fighting for animal welfare, or who are just fighting for environmental justice and accountability. Then I will go on to give an overview of our legal and police framework, of the legal and police framework in Zimbabwe. So we have quite a number of laws and policies that deal with animal welfare, that deal with these elephants in captivity in Zimbabwe. Lynn talked a bit about some of them, so I will just summarize. We have the Constitution of Zimbabwe, and that is the supreme law of Zimbabwe. It is a 2013 document when it was passed in a referendum. And it provides for a number of rights that can be utilized in protecting animal welfare and environmental rights. And this is one of the key documents that we have also been utilizing in our public interest environmental litigation concerning the trade transparency. So the Constitution contains a number of rights that can be utilized by environmental rights activists. It provides for the right to access information, any information that is held by public bodies, any person, the media, and citizens have the right to access such information, and that is Section 62 of our Constitution. It also provides for public accountability and for principles of public finance management. It also provides for the right for various environmental rights in Section 73. Then we also have the Parks and Wildlife Management Act, and under this we have one key subsidiary legislation, or a statutory instrument that falls under the Parks and Wildlife Management Act, known as the Parks and Wildlife Import and Export Wildlife Regulations of 1998. That statutory instrument provides for a number of contains a number of provisions that can be used in defending animal rights in Zimbabwe. It also provides for condition of exporting, the conditions that should be met when a part or when an institution is exporting Zimbabwe's wildlife. We have the Environmental Management Act, which sort of expands the environmental rights captured in Section 73 of our Constitution. Zimbabwe is also a signatory to a number of international environmental and wildlife treaties, such as the CITES Convention, where it is also supposed to abide by various wildlife transportation regulations, also part of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And at the regional level, we have the SADC Protocol on Wildlife Conservation and Law Enforcement. So this is quite a rich legal and policy framework. The major problem then comes with the implementation, and that's when most of the organizations, that's where most of us are concerned to see that if we have such a considerable body of laws, if we have these policies, why are they not being implemented? That's when we step in, as I mentioned earlier. So, having looked at this board of laws and policies, I will also share what we have done as an organization. We have worked with other concerned organizations in requesting for information. You know, we felt that when we were hearing this news about wildlife capture, about the cruel methods of capture that were being utilized to take these elephants, about the lack of transparency that has already been mentioned, the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability. We felt that the first step was for us, obviously, to request for this information on trade transparency and to monitor these capture methods. And so we wrote a number of letters to the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority. Some of these letters were ignored and some were responded to, but the information was not adequate. So we ended up partnering with other organizations, SPCA, Veterans for Animal Warfare, Zimbabwe Elephants Foundation, and we came up with a parliamentary petition. Yeah, that's just a screenshot of the parliamentary petition on the extreme left. Unfortunately, it can't be seen, but we came up with this parliamentary petition. We also came up with a court application, which is an ongoing action in Zimbabwe right now. I think that's a news report here in the Sunday Times talking about that court action where it says NGO demands details of Zim's government elephant trade with China. Basically, we were issuing a number of requests, such as we felt that we needed to know the number of elephants that are being exported at any government members, at any moment, the ages of the elephants, the final specific destinations, the method of capture, the buyers and other applicants. We have requested to purchase the elephants, the prices, the exact export dates, because all that information was not readily available. Then we also participated, again with the support of a number of organizations, we also participated in the CITES COP18. So I will move on to some of the challenges that I feel we continue to face and other organizations continue to face in terms of the legal and police framework, or in terms of general protection for elephants. There's the issue of poaching, illegal wildlife trade, and then there's also the abuse of the rule of law by governments or by institutions that are supposed to abide by the law and that are supposed to protect these animals. There's also the issue of lack of transparency when it comes to wildlife trade. The information is not readily available. There's lack of public accountability. The capture methods are very cruel, as most people here from a scientific background would attest. There's the issue of secrecy, and there's also limited knowledge among some decision makers, because we, in our journey, also encountered that a number of parliamentarians were willing to come to our cause, but they also lacked such information, such knowledge about the importance of these animals. There are also the Animal Rights Board of Laws, even though they are a bit comprehensive, they are also still less developed if we are to compare with other regions. And also there's lack of public awareness. However, I will go on to the opportunities. The first opportunity is that we have some rules and regulations, but then the implementation, like I mentioned earlier, is the challenge. We also have committed animal rights and environmental law networks. We are also seeing increasing research and advocacy. I'm sure at this meeting, there are quite a number of books on these issues. And also gatherings and forums such as this one, which is the first Elephants in Captivity INDABA. We also have the opportunities for regional cooperation by conservation groups and NGOs. So as a way forward, my last slide. As a way forward, I think we need more awareness raising. We need more training, especially for these policymakers, for the communities, utilization of social media, need more advocates, meetings to explain what occurs at these CITES meetings and other international meetings, animal rights monitoring, law and policy research and analysis, more public interest litigation, training, and mobilization of community-based monitors. Thank you.
Thank you, Lennon. I don't know whether this has any bearing on elephants, but I believe Robert Mugabe finally did die. Yesterday?
Yes.
Yeah. Gosh, long reign. Brett, over to you.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes. Good. Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, please bear with me for the next 10 minutes. This is definitely not my strong suit, sitting in front of a whole lot of people talking. Yeah, just to give you a bit of background on myself, I've had the privilege of working with elephants for over 20 years now. I started working with 4 elephants back in 1996, 97. With these same elephants and another 3 of them, I embarked upon their reintegration back to the wild back in 2015. And in between this period, and currently, I've been working with a number of different elephants in various situations. Does this thing work? There we go. Today, I'll be talking about the status of the captive elephants and the industry in South Africa. As many of you are aware, the subject of elephants in captivity is a contentious one. There have been raging debates on the subject with extremely varying views as whether or not it is ethical. Stay near the mic and look sideways. Just for the live streamers. For the live streamers, okay, all right. No problem. There have been raging debates on the subject with extremely varying views as whether or not it's ethical for elephants to be kept in captivity regardless of the circumstance, even if the welfare is of the highest standard. In South Africa, the elephants in captivity are predominantly managed in direct contact systems, with only the 2 zoos managing the elephants in a protected contact system. Over the last couple of months, I've been updating the numbers of the elephants and facilities in South Africa from the last updates that were done around 2014, 2015, along with looking at what types of tourism are being offered and the various conditions that the elephants' daily lives are under. The main reason was to have an accurate figure as possible of the number of elephants currently in captivity and the facilities in SA, to see whether it was decreasing, increasing, or static, as well as to gauge current conditions in the various places. This thing doesn't work. There we go. It was clear when putting the numbers together that there's been a fairly significant decrease of around 23% from about 124, 125 elephants back in 2014 to currently at 95 in captive facilities. The current numbers are fairly evenly split between bulls and cows, with bulls having been 44 and cows 47, but with only 4 elephants that are younger than the age of 8 years of age. The decrease in numbers was mainly due to the reintegration of elephants back into the wild, along with death and facility closure. With the implementation of the norms and standards back in 2008, this took away the ability to capture from the wild, which in effect curbed the industry from expanding a lot further. The facility numbers decreased by about 19%. Of the 5 operation closures, 4 were due to reintegrating elephants back into the wild, and then 1 facility closed its operation a couple of months back after selling the elephants off to Joburg Zoo, and those are the 2 new elephants that are in Joburg Zoo at the moment. The highest concentration of captive facilities is here in the Western Cape, and you can sort of put it down more than likely to establishing these facilities due to the volume of tourism that is in and around the Garden Route area. It also happens to be this thing doesn't want to change. There we go. It also happens to be where the highest number of captive elephants are held. I think that just happens to be, it's not, Limpopo's got one facility with a large number of elephants, so it's more the facilities that are a concern. Amongst the current captive operation, there's been a huge shift away from the elephant back safari side to doing only interactions or walking with elephants. Of the 26 facilities back in 2014 that were operating, 15 of them conducted elephant back safaris, and this dropped to around about 3 where we are now, which is a massive decrease. The facilities that were only offering tactile interactions, no riding at that stage, also decreased by about 24%, but this was mainly due to the closure of these facilities. Why the decrease? The decrease in both sectors are mainly due to 3 reasons: public pressure, handling issues, which is battling to deal with a lot of the elephants, and ethical reasons, simply doing the right thing. Where we are. The facilities offering tourism activities vary greatly from 1 or 2 sessions per day up to as many as 9. The operations that offer numerous activities or sessions throughout the day create a situation whereby the elephants are continually being utilized for tourism and have minimal free time as such, creating a lack of freedom of choice within the environment that they live. This will, however, vary from day to day depending on the guest numbers. The activities offered is a mixed bag, and many of these operations being mainly about human entertainment, attempting to make the experience as interactive as possible, from hugging, touching the elephant all over, walking in front, kicking balls around and getting kissed by the elephants. The operations that offer a simple interaction where guests simply feed the elephants and the elephants cannot access the guests easily allows for a much better, safer environment and experience. But most importantly, the elephants are generally able to move away if they choose to. For most people, being able to interact with an elephant is a special experience without taking into account the history of that elephant. However, it is clear that the elephants themselves are interacting for mainly 2 reasons. The handlers are bringing the elephants to interact and control their movements from the ground or from atop the elephant. And then secondly, the food that the guests feed the elephants helps to retain the elephants at that interaction. As soon as the food is finished and the handlers cease to control the elephants, they simply move away. This highlights that the elephants would prefer freedom of choice and for the most part only interact for the chance to receive food. The captive conditions varied hugely between these facilities from good to bad due to tourism and how the daily lives of the elephants are managed. There seems to be a link between what number of tourism activities are on offer, with a higher number showing poorer conditions. There, however, are ones with a lower number of activities which are also poor. In South Africa, we have an interesting situation regarding direct contact handling versus protected contact handling management systems. The tourism activities rely on direct contact handling to be able to simply operate with riding or tactile interactions. However, this type of handling comes with serious associated risks, such as injury and fatality for both the handlers and the guests. The statistics clearly highlight this risk. And when handling elephants in direct contact, it is not a case of if an incident will occur, it is a case of when it will occur. Now, whilst protected contact and zoo systems should be utilized, there is the potential that certain operations in South Africa, without considering the tourism aspect and purely the current elephant's current lifestyle, if they were to place the elephants under protected contact management, would in effect reduce the elephant's current welfare. Many of these elephants spend the majority of their day roaming on the reserve, feeding naturally, interacting with the environment, even though they are under direct contact management. On the face of it, It is, on the face of it, however, potentially due to the way some operations manage the elephants, the space availability and high volume of tourism activities that the elephants are required to do, it would lean towards these elephants being in protected contact. To improve their welfare in captivity, naturally additional research would be required as to what the welfare differences improvements would be. Saying that, though, it would be first prize for the elephants to have the option to live their lives as free-ranging elephants and not in captivity at all. And then what was very noticeable is the low number of elephant calves in captivity. There's only 4 of them under the age of 8 years of age. And 2 of those are orphaned elephants, and 2 were born in captivity. This, however, is not surprising due to the introduction of the GnRH vaccination, due to the introduction of GnRH vaccine, given to pretty much all the bulls over a certain age, as well as some of the cows. In the bulls, the GnRH vaccine decreases the testosterone level of the bull to virtually 0 value, thus preventing must from occurring in the bull, and the ability to breed effectively, if at all. With the ability to curb the must state of bulls in captivity, this allows the operations to continue utilizing the bulls in tourism, tactile activities, but at the same time effectively stops the elephants breeding. Some operations would simply cease to exist without the use of GnRH on their bulls. Even when bulls have been placed on GnRH, this does not prevent management issues, and this only affects the testosterone-related aggression. It does not affect the mental aggression due to circumstance. I believe that the use of GnRH can be an effective interim management tool to ensure a safe environment whilst future management plans are made for the elephant and the operations. Unfortunately, it is all too common within the industry to simply move, kill, or sell an elephant, or be it a bull or a cow, without regard to the social structure disruption that causes for the elephant, and also in question, along with the elephants left behind. If they are kept at the operation, they're inevitably separate from the rest of the elephants in commercial use, so as not to affect the side of the business. This separation by management creates additional behavioral issues at the facility. Nearly done. Bellman. The majority of elephants in captivity are used purely for commercial and financial gain, with their welfare generally taking second tier. There will be argument from the various facilities that the elephants are looked after and enjoy the interactions with guests and their handlers. However, if given the choice, their very elephant would prefer to free range without interference. This I've experienced firsthand with elephants I've reintegrated back into free ranging systems. In closing, it is my opinion that the captive tourism industry, not just in South Africa, but also other countries, require urgent attention. The reintegration of captive elephants back into the wild has been successfully achieved in South Africa and Botswana, and to some extent in Zimbabwe, and should be the main avenue sought for the current captive elephants. Yes, there will be challenges. However, the correct ethical approach is simply doing what is morally right for the elephants. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Brett. I just want to remind everyone that what we're really trying to do here, and we want to do it by the end of the day, is to create an ethical welfare-based policy or framework regarding elephants in captivity. So that's where we're heading. I believe Joyce Poole is still with us, so if you want to be part of this discussion, please do. I'd like to start. I think we're getting questions from the floor. Ross, do you want to give us some of those?
Okay, they're coming in, and I've just sent an updated list. Am I on for the live streamers now that I've told the panelists they must talk into the mic? Hello.
You're on.
I'm on. Okay, great. All right, so I think let's start with this question. It's a question from the floor, and then also panelists who have questions for each other. We'll try and create some time for that. But question from the floor: is it time to redefine cruelty to animals? The inherent and insidious cruelty meted out to captive elephants may not be immediately visible to the public at large. Invisible health problems, mental anguish, and therefore often ignored. And will a change in definition make a difference? And then there's a question for Brett as well, just came up right now, which I think is timeless. What made you move, Brett, from tourism to reintegration? So I think Brett first, Don, if I have your permission, and then probably Marion for the first question.
Sure. Am I on? Is this on? Yeah. The move, I've always believed that elephants belong in the wild. And I'd been talking about reintegration for many years with the company that I operated with. And after a lot of pushing and shoving from my side, we managed to wrap up a very successful operation. It was very profitable, and it was purely about doing the right thing, purely for ethical reasons. And as much emotion as went into it from my side, I've been with those elephants for many, many years. To see them free-ranging now, and both mom and daughter have both just had calves in January, a week apart. So that in itself is a success story. So it's purely about doing the right thing.
Does somebody want to take the question on about redefining cruelty and how that may help us?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think, yeah, we could probably redefine cruelty. But, you know, I think the definition of it now is probably, it just needs to be applied correctly. I think it doesn't get applied for whatever reason. I think financial gain dictates a lot of it. Just, yeah, I think our moral compasses are fairly skewed at the moment.
Anybody else want to pick up that?
I think Brett has summed it up. Yeah.
Marion, maybe?
I personally don't think that we need to redefine it, because my feel is that everybody anywhere in the world will have a different view of what cruelty is. And I think there are general statements out there what cruelty is, but I go along with what Brett said. It's a matter now of getting the world to understand what this cruelty actually implies. And I think that's something that I personally feel very strong about this particular day today, about this forum, that yes, we can define a policy, that's another paperwork, we can define cruelty, that's another paperwork, but I would like to see more action. And I think this group is now the start of creating a worldwide group which deals with the topics. And I'm thinking something along the lines of the forum that we have here, which Michelle Pickover created, the forum that we have here within our country. I think this should be something that should cross-border, generally African countries or worldwide. There's no stop to it. We have the Asian groups which have formalized themselves, the welfare organizations, and they have a very, very strong voice. And I think also listening to what comes out of Zimbabwe, the frustration there, I can feel it. I can feel it in my stomach, the frustration out of Zimbabwe, because it is just, and they're fighting on their own. They need support. And I think this group could be the start of something really, really big to provide support to everybody. And let's not redefine too many things. That's paperwork which nobody goes by.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
I'd like to just to both Brett and Marion and anyone else who's been involved in reintroductions. I'm curious what you think about the difficulty of bringing elephants from zoos in the United States and you know, bringing them back to the wild. I mean, there is the problem of things like TB and diseases, but in terms of just their ability to make that transition, what do you think, either of you?
Sure, Joyce. No,
Go ahead.
it's an interesting question, and it's one of the things I've learned with elephants, and it's about time, and I think they don't lose their wild state, even born there, and I think it's depending on the type of captive operation or captive facility that they've been in, that will determine the time period that it will take to reintegrate, whether it takes a year, 6 months, or 5 years, or 10 years, depending on the elephant. And you go at their pace, they will let us know when they're ready, and you'll see the change. And there are going to be cases where certain elephants simply may not be able to be reintegrated, be it physical or they've just had way too much psychological issues. But I still believe that over time you'll probably get it right.
Okay, I mean, I would agree with you. That would be my assumption too. And I wonder whether, I mean, there are many more problems at hand, but whether A, we could encourage zoos to do the right thing, and B, whether there are any African range states that would be willing to take such elephants. I mean, I'm thinking longer term. There are other things that are more immediate, but curious what you think.
Yeah, no, and it'd be nice for a lot of zoos to actually change their manner. I mean, we're currently fighting the fight with Joburg Zoo, and I think that's a you know, there needs to be a shift in mindset with a lot of species. With regards to African states and stuff, I think again with the right discussions and doing it properly, and it should be doable. In South Africa, we do have the ability. We've got the reserves. We've got spatial for it. So you know, I think the way forward should be that way. Like places like Zimbabwe, a lot of the, you know, I mean, currently it's got its own issues, and you know, reintegrating elephants into a national park where they're catching them wouldn't be the best idea. But when that all comes right, then yes, places like Zim are great for it.
We have some questions from the floor, unless somebody'd like to continue with that question, but otherwise questions from the floor.
Okay. Right, so Marion, we have 2 questions here for you. I also just want to commend Marion's chapter in The Last Elephant to anyone who hasn't read it. Our children enjoyed it, and it's really great. So Marion, what are the survival rates of captive-born calves? I'm not sure whether that was in your numbers. And then how do the survival figures per age category in captivity compared to survival in the same categories in the wild?
No, I did not look at that, to be quite honest. That is definitely something that one can look at. I don't have the figures now offhand, but there's been great studies done, although they're not the newest studies anymore, and it's time to update them. There was the famous one from UK, but was it the university study by Mason and her author, which definitely showed that the survival rate is much lower in zoos. The birth rate is much lower, the survival rate is much lower, and the deaths, also the zoo elephants die much earlier. But I did not analyze the current data to give you exact figures.
Okay, thanks, Marion. And then a question for our Zimbabwean guests, both Lennon and Lynn. The problem is that Zim sees elephants like cows. Is there a path, at least in law, to recognize animals as more than that? I assume I'm putting words in the questioner's mouth here, given sentience and what we know about elephants. And maybe also to the Zimbabweans, just while we're here, is I enjoyed the kind of veiled reference to crocodiles, and that we have one in Mugabe's place, and that it seems that exporting live elephants is one means of trying to continue to loot anything that Mnangagwa can to pay his soldiers. And I probably shouldn't say that in a public forum, but there is a question around how we're going to change the mindset of Zimbabwean policymakers and those in charge. And so maybe we could have a discussion about that.
I think I'll just say a bit. Was it really a question? I think it was a comment, isn't it?
So the first question was, is there room in Zimbabwean law to treat, to see elephants as more than mere objects? I think that's the right way of putting the question.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, I should say. But like I mentioned earlier, there's still need for an improvement in Zimbabwe's laws, especially in their Zimbabwean laws and policies, in their perceptions of elephants. Because at the moment, like the rest of other Southern African countries, it's more about what they call sustainable utilization. So it's mostly about seeing them as also market objects, which can be which should be transformed into money. Most of the times, our laws have not really developed to the extent of seeing elephants as more than mainly commercial beings. But there are some aspects of, especially in the Parks and Wildlife Act, where they also encourage that natural resources should be seen for their beauty, for their aesthetic values.
Right.
Yeah.
Leading on from that, how's Campfire doing?
Oh, yes.
The Campfire projects?
Or
Are they still active, or have they died off?
Yeah, I think the Campfire projects, it was a very vibrant in the past, historically. But at the moment, it is still in existence. If you travel to other districts, especially, I remember when I went to rural Kariba, it is still in existence though, but on a very low note, because in some communities, in some districts, the community members themselves, they indicated that they were not really seeing any benefits. They were not really being given the opportunity to participate in that project. So, but I think initially when it started, it was a very good idea, but the implementation, like anything else, has gone astray.
Come in and add to that, Lennon. Basically, around Gonorrhea Conservation Trust, it's working very well. I think it's hard work, but it's working well. The community on the north side of Gonorrhea have added 7,000 hectares to Gonorrhea on the north side of the Savi River. So that's a huge success. I think what Lennon said is right. On the whole, Campfire's had a knock. It goes back to politics. The money goes into the community, and then it's really got to get to the people, and getting it to the people just doesn't happen. So, but it is happening in Gonorrhea, and it's an awesome thing to see. And the elephants are now crossing the river, and they're now spending time on the northern side of the river, which they never used to do. And of course, there's part of the area there where they can be hunted. Going back to the elephants like cows, I don't think all Zimbabweans see elephants like cows. I think that we need a lot of education with a lot of people. We need to involve rural communities. They need to get the benefit. But we need to stop successive governments looting our national heritage. So from that point of view, yes, in Zimbabwean culture, cows are seen as finance. From that point of view, yes. But I also think it begs the question that surely we're at a point where we have to come to a combined agreement on what elephants are within the world. They, as somebody said earlier, they cross borders. They don't necessarily all belong to us. So whatever we agree on, Zimbabwe has to take that up. It's time we got in line with some of those things.
Can I just drop in here for the last 5 minutes and ask each of you, if you give it a thought, what statement would you make with regards to elephants in captivity going forward? If you had to make a single statement about what you would like to see as a policy, as a framework, as a non-negotiable baseline for elephants in captivity. It's a challenge. It's in 5 minutes, but if you have one of those lines that will change the world,
No,
have a go.
I think policy-wise, I think it's been said already, and Ord's mentioned it in the norms, and we don't have much teeth there. We've got too many variables in the captive industry, from circuses through to elephants at range, naturally during the day, but at Bowman at night. So there's huge variance between captivity. But I think from a statement perspective, I'd like to see elephants back in the wild where they belong. I know there will be challenges, and you might find there will be elephants in captivity in another 20 years or 30 years. But I think the type of captivity and how it's done needs to be redefined.
Anybody else?
It's a long statement.
The final statement was very good. You got to it.
Okay. Elephants in the wild. I think that it's the bottom line. It's where they belong, and I don't have a catchphrase or a one-liner for that, but I think whatever we do with elephants, if we could do it humanely, it would be a really good thing, whether we're managing their populations or whatever we're doing. If it could be done in the most humane manner possible as we continue to put pressure on them going forward. There are too many people.
Marion, would you like to? Yeah.
Oh, yes, sorry. I do agree with that one. There are too many people. Thanks for that. I think we're all on the same boat. I don't think that we will ever stop all captivity, but I think that should be our maybe unreachable star that we should go for, definitely in this forum, that elephants belong to the wild, and we should put every attempt to keep them out of captivity and to give them back their dignity and the freedom that they deserve. But this also means changing the attitudes of people, changing mindsets of people, and that's a huge challenge. But I think we all agree, basically elephants belong into the wild, into the freedom, and with all the dignity that goes with it.
Thanks. Lennon, you want to have a go at this?
Oh, yeah.
Capture the whole thing in one sentence. You're a lawyer.
I think basically I also agree that we also need to keep these animals in the wild so that they are also treated as, beings. But we also need to improve human and wildlife interaction and keep less focus on human-wildlife conflict, but also put more emphasis and effort into the interaction itself between humanity and wildlife.
Okay. Joyce, you want to come in on this?
Oh, well, yeah, sure. I think it was funny because Lynn was saying she didn't have a one line, but then she said, elephants in the wild, it's where they belong. And that's, I think, what we're coalescing around, all of us. How to say it so that it really can capture people's imagination is we just need to play with the words a little bit.
Thanks. Okay. Apart from those who are live streaming, it's lunchtime here. Sorry you can't come. Lunch is from now until 2:30. There are books for sale outside at much reduced rates because you elephant people and they elephant books. So, the authors are all here to sign them if you like that sort of thing. So we'll see you back here at 14:30. Thank you.